Okay.
This is my box. Here we
Alright,
go.
If that's the one you want.
Let's find out if the rock's in it.
Distraction makers.
Something that I've noticed about Commander players, they tend to lean more on politics than they do on bluffing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to most people, they might think those are basically the same thing.
Yeah, I think politicking gets confused for a lot of things. We've heard politicking confused as collusion before, and I think some people have also kind of mistaken it for bluffing. But definitely think that there's a very distinct difference. So one way that we're going to kind of show the difference here between bluffing and also just kind of get into the skill of bluffing and what that is in games is through a demonstration of a game that we are going to call Rock in a Box. The rules of Rock in a Box are simple. One person can look in their box. The other person can decide whether they want to swap their box or keep their box. Right. Once you've decided whether you're going to swap or keep, you'll open your boxes. Whoever has the rock in their box wins the game.
Right.
All right?
Yep.
So I'm going to look in my box.
Look in your box.
I have 5 rocks in the box.
5?
5.
That's plausible.
Yep.
But is it true? I don't know.
Bluffing! This is bluffing!
The reason why we're playing this game is because this game is minimum viable bluffing. So let's talk about the elements of this game that create the dynamic of bluffing. Bluffing is not something that you can just write into the rules of your game, right? It is a dynamic that emerges from a set of circumstances that you put players in.
Right. It's very difficult to just tell players you have to bluff.
You
right?
have to bluff.
You are pushing players into circumstances that it benefits them more if they bluff.
Let's start with what a game is, right? For us, a game is a meaningful decision, an uncertain outcome, and measurable results. On top of that, we have to add in particular criteria to make sure that bluffing is a dynamic that emerges. The criteria that we're adding is to the meaningful decision part of the game equation, effectively. And within that meaningful decision, you have to have an asymmetry of information, and you have to have a narrowed possibility space. So let's go through and explain how Rock in a Box fulfills those criteria.
I have more information than you have, or at least a difference in information than what you have, because I know whether or not this box, actually I know which box has the rock.
You now
in the
know,
box.
yes.
Right.
And I don't.
Right. And the possibility space is clamped because there's only 2 boxes and one of them has a rock. We know that.
Part of bringing up the possibility space part of this is that the thing that you are bluffing has to be sort of plausible to me, right? Not just possible, right? Because if the possibility space is so vast, then it's almost meaningless for you to try to bluff one thing or another. This comes up with Richard Garfield uses the toy game, I guess the example game of guess the digit of pi. And you'll sort of like just name, guess the 550,000th digit of pi. And technically, is that knowable? Yes. But it's so vast that like it's basically meaningless. Let's say you were to say, like we were playing like horse in a box, right? Like a literal horse. We know they can't fit in the box. So we know that's just like not a possibility for it to be in either box.
Another common place that you see this is when you're playing something like poker. And let's say that you know in your hand the total possibility space based off of the cards on in the field. What let's say the highest suit combination could be, right? Mm-hmm. Highest score you could have.
Of what you can have. Right. But you also might know the possibilities that other players might have, right?
Right. And so it's possible that, let's say, you've narrowed it down that you more than likely or potentially for sure have the best hand out of the group, but someone else is just bluffing continuous. They just keep throwing money in. You go, well, there's no real point in you doing that.
I have the best hand.
Because you know that you have the best hand.
Yeah, and that's sort of the asymmetry of information that we're talking about. The other part of this is that it's a modification to the meaningful decision part of the game because there has to be a decision point to be made. Bluffing, like this instance of bluffing can be a sub-game, but it doesn't have to be. It can't just be the totality of the game like we're seeing here. But what happens when you do that is that it comes down to just one decision, right? Rather than developing a pattern where you're sort of able to read your opponent based on multiple iterations of this bluffing cycle, which deepens the sort of strategic well that can be created.
So you'll see this commonly in Magic, obviously, with wondering whether someone has a counterspell or not, right? As a blue player, it's usually a smart idea to keep 2 blue untapped mana, depending on the meta, maybe 1 blue, I don't know. But in order to constantly threaten your opponent that you could potentially have a counterspell to play on their turn. So with that being said, let's go back, let's transition this back into how is this different from politicking?
But first...
Oh. Do you want to swap boxes?
No, I want to ask a question.
Okay.
You said there were 5 rocks in your box?
I changed my mind. There's 7.
There's 7 rocks in your box.
Yeah.
But we're playing 1 rock in a box.
Could be, yeah.
So this box has the rocks in it.
Probably.
How sure are you that there's a rock in that box?
About 50% sure.
Interesting. Okay.
50% sure.
I'm gonna switch boxes.
You're going to swap boxes?
Yeah, let's swap boxes.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Okay. All right. If you want.
So let's talk about politics. They both have a skill component that's outside of the game systems, but politics exists almost entirely outside of the game's systems and can be powerful enough to sort of override what can happen because the possibility space matters much less in the instance of politics. And what I mean by that is if you have sort of the dynamic of, let's say, a 4-player game and you're choosing to attack one player over the other, you end up with these pressures that are being put on you that have nothing to do with the game in politicking, which would be guilt tripping or pleading or threatening. And none of that has to do with any kind of deduction that can happen within the game's systems, right? You're just choosing, I'm going to attack you or attack you. And this sort of bluffing-esque dynamic emerges. It's not one that's heavily influenced by the game systems, the way that bluffing is.
If you were to play, let's say, like a digital version of Commander, right? If there's no, let's say, emotes, no way of chatting with anyone else, there's no real way for you to actually influence politicking, right? You can try and maybe influence people's decisions subtly, I suppose, but there's no explicit way for you to say, like, don't attack me. Like, I don't want that. But there is ways for you to bluff still. There are ways for you to bluff still.
Sure. Yeah, right. And those ways are all emergent from the game systems. Like you're saying, the best way to analyze it is to look at it in a digital environment where the systems are the only thing that's being sort of tested, right? And what we can see is that, yeah, like you said, leaving 2 blue mana untapped, quintessential way to bluff that you have a counterspell against your opponent, whether you do or not. So the other part of this is that bluffing is kind of a skill multiplier, I think is the best way to sort of describe it, is that in order, as we said, the criteria for bluffing has to be that there's a meaningful decision with an asymmetry in information and a narrowed possibility space. Where if one player doesn't really understand the possibility space of what's happening, the other player can't really bluff, right? So if I was like, I don't even know why we're switching these boxes, right? There's no way, I have no meaningful decision to make. I have no way to know how to win the game. I don't know what your possible options are. I don't understand really anything out of that dynamic, right? So that dynamic doesn't emerge because my skill level of the system is not great enough yet for me to have gotten to the point where bluffing can occur.
We've talked before in a few videos, maybe we'll make a video on this separately at some point, specifically about the concept of donkey space. But yeah, essentially donkey space is not understanding whether or not someone is existing in the space of understanding a particular skill, of being like a good player, or if they're they're deliberately trying to play suboptimally in order to sort of turn the corner and gain an advantage over another player.
Right. Are they a bad player, or are they making me think they're a bad player would sort of be the dynamic.
Right. And if you are a player that doesn't know basically that bluffing is a thing, you aren't able to even enter into that space. Right. So it's still possible that you, being a new player, you could make someone else sweat that is a player because they don't know that you don't know about that, unless you make it very clear. And that usually happens with new Magic players, where they're just tapping all their mana and passing turn, and that's it.
I think this is something that players observe as like beginner's luck, right? It's someone who doesn't understand all of like the norms of how people play the game, and so they might be making decisions in this way that is like extremely confusing to players who have played the game a lot, right? And so you end up being caught off guard by things that because you're like, well, nobody makes that move. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know how to respond to that because it's outside of my pattern recognition.
You can see this with how players reacted to AlphaGo, right? AlphaGo ended up sort of perfecting Go, but then other players ended up basically doing moves that seemed suboptimal, and no player would ever do that move, and they would beat the computer that way.
I mean, honestly, it's like a great example of this sort of emergent idea, right? Is that AlphaGo is trained on data from the best Go players. And so it just sort of memorized all those patterns, and all the best Go players were stumped because they're like, it just knows every move. But what they realized was it had been trained only on the best Go players. So if they made suboptimal moves, like you said, the algorithm then had no idea what to do. What was funny was Go players reportedly have said this has made them better players because now they're realizing that like, oh, these other moves are still possible. And not necessarily suboptimal in the way we thought they were, because now we've reached this point of optimal that suboptimal is more optimal.
Well, it's almost Go players sort of realizing donkey space is a thing, right?
Sure.
Is understanding that actually I can subvert players.
I assume that they knew it was a thing before that, but like
probably. Yeah.
I wonder if they didn't. There's this thing in chess where they're talking about like you make a bunch of moves until people start like running out of prep, right? Is the idea. So a prep being basically just a term for memorization. And once you get to that point, that's when the game really happens. And I'm wondering if like that was also how Go players were seeing the game, but then they've realized that like, oh, you actually can start that process much sooner.
Well, and because with Go, unlike chess has that sort of like initial board.
Setup,
yeah, but Go has so many different ways you could start.
So another thing we need to touch on a bit about bluffing, it has to do with chess, right? And chess, as I was saying, you can enter into this. I don't know. I wonder if chess players have a term for this. I don't know exactly what it would be, but we would basically call it donkey space, where you're sort of unsure of whether or not your opponent has run out of prep. So the strange thing about chess in this instance is that chess technically has perfect information, where we're saying some amount of information asymmetry is important. An easy way to get that is through hidden information, like rock in a box. But
speaking of which, do you want to swap boxes?
Why would I want to do that?
I'm just asking.
I mean,
just giving you the opportunity if you want to swap.
So you clearly want my box now.
No, I just asking.
Because you know that this is the rock.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you are satisfied with the box that you got.
Yeah, feel pretty good now.
Okay.
So in chess, right, you enter into this space where you're not sure if your opponent has run out of prep. And that means that like you're right on this edge of, does my opponent still understand the game in its totality at the point we're at? Or have they moved to a point where they don't understand anymore and are acting suboptimally? Or are they pretending to act suboptimally to make me think that they've run out of prep? And that dance that happens is, I think, what players of chess refer to as like, that's when chess is really happening. And there's also this dance between like, okay, you could like leave your prep and then be moving in a way that gets you back to prep that you do have, right? To get sort of the game back under your control.
I really think chess is a little bit miraculous in its space that it exists in that it has such a huge possibility space, like you're saying, that it sort of obfuscates that information. In that technically there should be perfect information, like you're saying, but because there's so many possibilities, it's almost as if there's some sort of partial information between players. But it's not so overwhelming that players don't feel like they could still memorize some things. And I think that's just due to chess's same board setup every single time, right? With the same pieces. It'd be significantly different if people brought different pieces to a chessboard. Then suddenly I think, there'd be so many possibilities that you just couldn't even consider. Sure.
I guess. This other factor that we're talking about where if players aren't at a high enough skill level to bluff properly, that dynamic in chess won't emerge, right? Because you don't even know that you should be prepping. You're just sort of moving on instinct and like, oh, these pieces move in this way. You're not understanding that there's particular openings, there's particular ways you're supposed to move pieces, and sort of macro strategies to move the game in your favor. And I think that Commander players generally, so to kind of loop it back around to this
We're a Magic channel. We have to talk about Magic.
So to loop it back around to like 1v1 versus like Commander Magic, and why Commander seems to lean more heavily on politics. These two dynamics are connected, right? Politics and bluffing are connected, right? Bluffing is sort of a part of politics, but politics is like much more broad than what bluffing is because it extends beyond the game systems itself. And it's still a dynamic. It's still emergent of the situation that you've put players in. But this is when your dynamics become problematic to your system. And as a designer, this is something that you have to account for and design around.
Technically, you can politic in 1v1 Magic,
Sure.
right? But the efficiency of it is just basically non-existent.
Basically zero.
Right? Now, your level of politicking, let's say if you're trying to take outside social pressures, right, that are agnostic of the game systems, you could say, I want to win this game of 1v1 Magic. So if you don't attack me and you let me win, I'll give you all the prize money.
It's a lot of the politic dynamic that emerges in 1v1 is stuff like that, which is against the rules, right? It's like explicitly stated in the rules you can't do stuff like that.
Right.
And the part of that is that it just is no other like leverage. There's no other options here in order of like, I'm going to attack you, and obviously I want to win the game. And in order to do that, I have to attack you. So the only kind of leverage you can have in that situation is saying something like, well, I'll give you the prize money or whatever. Versus in, 4-player Commander, you have a different option. You can just attack someone else, and your leverage is, well, I won't attack you if you don't attack me.
It also
right?
opens up your options of being able to, like, there's the small bean thing where you can say, well, I'm just a little guy, don't attack me. Like, it opens up so many possibilities because there's other people to point to, right? But yeah, all of that is just completely agnostic of what the game itself is doing. It doesn't mean that you can't still bluff, because technically you could be bluffing that you're just a little guy when actually you have like a bunch of stuff in your hand and you're about to pop off. But you're using politicking, right, as a way of bluffing that is just separate from it, which is why, like, I do think that it's easier to sort of look at this as if it were a sort of a digital constructed game, because digital games are sort of an unmoving system, right? Whatever the rules are the rules.
It's part of the reason why we advocate for CEDH tournaments to be no talking, or at least no talking about the game state or the cards in hand or criticizing play, things like that.
The way you phrased it earlier is a really good way of viewing it, which is that bluffing is just enhancing what the mastery of the game is already sort of like requiring of you. There's something about having these different like layers that you start to unfold when looking into a game. And it's another layer for you to start to recognize and be able to utilize when you're playing the game to just get better at it, which is great.
All right, so let's wrap up Rock in a Box.
Yeah.
And now the question is...
Now, you're sure you don't want to swap?
Yeah, this is the question, right? Is that, do I want to swap?
I mean, I already did tell you which one had the rock.
Which one is it?
It was the one you grabbed.
Okay, I'm going to take this box.
Are you sure?
Yep. Okay. This is my box. Here we go.
If that's the one you want.
Let's find out if the rock's in it. Yeah, the rock's in this box, baby. And that's how you win Rock in a Box.
By guessing.
Nah, I read you like
Skill?
I read you like a book.
Oh, okay. If you think that Rock in the Box is rigged, please feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
Also, if you want to continue this conversation, if you have any additional questions, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. I win.
Fuck you, Dwayne. Your movies suck.
Oof.
Oh, what?
What if he watches this?
Did you watch Rampage?
No.